Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Parampara. It is, let me be very frank, it is a honor that my beloved Dean, Professor Gauri Malikarji, along with our Vice Chancellor, Professor Nagaraj Nichal, and the friends of IKS School, Indian Knowledge Systems in CVV, had invited me to deliver a talk before the public on behalf of university. So that is one of the recognitions which university has given to me. I'm thankful for that. I'll be trying my best to do justice to that kind of a gesture which has shown towards me. So as you all know, I have decided the topic or titled the topic with a small tagline, imagining a world of Bharatiya values. It is because for the last 3 years after my post-graduation in international law, I wanted to study, understand Indian state practice, Indian customary laws with regard to international relations. And I've been introduced to Nitihasas and Sastras by my professor, Professor Srinivasa Varkedi sir as well. So it was very difficult for me to understand or unearth the principles and the insights involved in these texts and Shastra, and to apply it in a sense in which is useful for the present world and also to the present arguments of customary international law of the state. What I understood over a period of time, it is because that we see the world from a purview of our education, which has a lot of things to do with the last 300 or 4 centuries, where we have borrowed ideas of success, ideas of happiness, ideas of rights and responsibilities. So many things we have learned, imbibed through our education. And when we start reading these texts with this framework, it was very difficult to understand what are they meaning actually. So over a period of 3 years, somewhere I found reimagining a world with a different set of values, a different set of things which we value for, which we aspire for, could help us to understand the cases or the incidents of Puranas, as well as whatever messages has been put up in Shastras very differently, or in a much more relatable sense. So that's the reason I have titled the topic Introduction to Dharmashastra and Nitishastra with a tagline called Imagining a Worldview, imagining a world of Bharatiya values. Now, moving on to the discussion of Dharma and Niti, I am not a scholar of that level to tell you exactly nuances of each and every interpretation of Dharma or Niti in a way that the traditional scholars of Bharat has done so far. So my attempt here is to discuss these concepts and introduce you to a way of reading texts like Manusmriti or Arthashastra with a different framework altogether. I'll hope I would be able to again do justice to this. So I would like to ask a few questions before we start, but since it is a online interaction, I would just assume myself these questions have been asked and answered. So if you see the screen at the moment, I have asked, what is our jitnasa about studying Dharma and Niti? So is it an interest towards our past and cultural heritage? Is it that we are fond of cultural integrity to that much? Or is it that we are trying to rewrite the history according to ever-changing power equations at the politics at the national, international or state levels? Are we interested in changing our individual lifestyle accordingly? To me, that is the most important question of studying Dharma and Niti. Along with this third question or fourth question, the next two questions also is very close to my heart, is that are we attempting to decolonize the Indian mind from Eurocentric approach to the life and world? And are we looking for innovation in moral, legal, and political philosophy. Now, if this is our jitnasa, I have mentioned 3 in yellow colors because those 3 are closer to my view and my framework. So I also want to say that the earlier 3 are not my area of work because I'm not a historian. I am a legal student. I'm a student of law. So if I am studying Dharma and Niti, it have its own baggages. So I'm not looking at the initial 3 questions. And then moving on to the next discussion, I also want to give a pre-note that there are few concepts which actually I want to discuss before we engage further discussions into Dharma Niti, Dharmashastra. That is, we have to keep in our mind a distinction between Shastra and text. Okay? So, Shastra may be linked to the text, or Shastra can be a greater canvas than the text. I'm not reducing the value of the text. We must understand what the text is and what the content of the text is. But Indian tradition greatly owe to oral way of education, oral tradition. So if a Manusmriti has been written or has been given to our hands at some point in near to 200 BC or 300 BC, there may be a time period in which the knowledge of Dharma belonging to Manu's tradition in our society beyond that period. So that has to be kept in our mind. There should be a difference when we use the word Shastra and when we use the word text as such. I would like to keep that note out there. Yes, so this is the next thing as I really wanted to say one more as a preface to the entire discussion. We have so far studied Dharma and Niti using a secondary literature of history which has been generated in a different framework. So there has been schools of study of Indian history. As you all may know, I'm not going much deep into this particular slide again, but because these are all preface slides. So if you see, there is an imperialist school which was predominantly found by Britishers such that they could influence our culture, understand our culture and do a better administration to get better interest or produce better interest for them. So better administration doesn't mean good for each of us, but to make more profits or more interest out of the land. Now, I also wonder when Britishers who were, or the Europeans who wanted to oppress or who wanted to establish their imperial rule over us, when they took a lot of effort to study our culture and to understand that efficiency of administration is closely associated with culture, are we doing the same? Right? Whether the Indian political science education or Indian legal education give ample importance to the culture of India, the people of India, sociology of Indian societies. It may be an insignificant study about mass masala movies, which happen in our theaters, because it enthralls a group of individuals in that theater. If they have found that much of inspiration from a dialogue of, let's say, Mahesh Babu or Shah Rukh Khan, right? There is a kind of spirit which generates inside when they hear that particular dialogue. But we see a very little significant study about these movies or certain things because we feel it is okay, it's just a mass masala movie. There's nothing to do with it. So I'm not saying Shastras or certain other things are also something like that. But when we see that kind of an influencing thing in our real lives and we forget about it. Much more deep-seated, much more subtle, but much more powerful concepts are there in Dharmashastra and Nitishastra and the allied living or the traditional life which have been following over the period of years. So, my mother used to say sometimes, Nirali Kuttiye Nintam Padipikkunnu, Malayalam. Okay? The set is there a requirement to teach octopus to swim? Now, that it seems to be a very family statement which anybody makes, but it has to tell a lot of things about our culture, the way our people look at things, and thus, do we study these kind of statements and from where do they come from and how do they understand it? So, whereas imperialistic school understood it, they studied our culture, they organized studies of understanding our culture and put forward to us. Similarly, there were schools nationalists who were trying to respond to imperialists. Now there were again another school, which is Marxist school, which tried to connect the historical studies of Dharma and Niti into economic understanding. So they connected the entire study of history of Dharma or history of our social life to economic materialism. The question of private property, the question of family being conditioning the child, the question of inequality issues amongst varnas, the question of economic well-being between different jadis has been set forward. Now, it had its own merit in many of our lives. It has changed many of our social life. But what it actually did was, it actually set up a debate, a perpetual debate between oppressed and oppressor, a perpetual debate between the government and the governed, right? So there onwards, what happened was, whatever reading which we do about Puranas or Dharmashastra or whatever it is, it always fell into this trap of this debate or this confrontational dichotomy between the governed and the government, right? I used to say when I learn LLB and LLM, that law is nothing but a language between governed and the government. Now, when I say it's a language, it should be perceived as a medium of communication. But if you look at the philosophy of law being taught in many schools these days, they will say it's an instrument of oppression, right? So it's from this particular view we start reading Dharmashastras, Nitishastra. It did not help us much. And later that, which comes as postmodernist school, again, what they did was kind of, deconstruction. They became more evidence-based than the earlier three schools. But what was the trap they fall in was, they also fall in the trap of this debate. And they got stuck to a debate of unity versus plurality, right? They wanted to speak about diverse things about culture and kind of thing. But at the same time, the other schools promoted certain idea of political unity, understanding things in a very unified fashion. So postmodern school also fell into the trap of this debate between plurality and unity, right? Even Dharmashastra had this kind of discussions. Like there are scholars who speak about regional Dharma, right? Or regional Dharmashastra. There are Smriti texts found in different parts of the country. So it's a very much diversified tradition. Now, should we understand Dharmashastra from the perspective of these, what you call as diversity which is available in these texts? Or should we be able to understand Dharma as a concept which has to give a lot of message of social harmony and solidarity in our lives? We have to rethink about how we are reading these texts. Now, when these four schools have been discussed in detail in schools and studies of law, jurisprudence, and morality in political science, we sometimes set apart insignificantly two other schools, which is one of the school is the Shastric school, where like people like Swami Katwatraji, Swami Chandrasekharendra Saraswati, they have all discussed Dharmashastra in a different way as a matter of living tradition, not as a history or antique. They studied, they felt that these Shastras still influence people's life, perhaps only their followers, but their followers were huge in numbers, right? How were we able to discard that many number of peoples from the eyes of our study of sociology and political science used to, bewilder me many times. So they understood Dharmashastra from a matter of integrity of practice, sadhana. I have used the word religious integrity. If some of us are offended on that sense of conflating the idea of sadhana with religion, I'm so sorry, just because I'm also, confusing with a lot of English words and other understanding of life. And one more set of school, like where scholars like Swami Chinmaya, Swami Vivekananda, Swami Shivanandaji are all belongs to, they try to understand Dharma and promote it in a daily life of human beings, in that sense that it sometimes went little, popular in nature, went little more softer. One of my colleague used to say, Shastric school dealt with Dharma in a sense like it speaks about Prabhu Samhita. It's like an elite or a Prabhu is telling to the followers, a leader telling to the followers. Whereas mission-based schools had an approach of Mitra Samhita, they were speaking as friends. You know how much care and Sushrusha, how much Valsalya, flowed from when we see the videos of Swami Chinmaya, Swami Shivananda ji or Swami Vivekananda sir, that much. What kind of care they try to shower on the people. So, amongst them, there is one important scholar which I like a lot, which is Swami Ranganathananda ji, who had worked immensely as to how to promote Dharmashastra in the administration of state and political studies. Now, I'm trying to say that these are the schools for the last two centuries which we felt, which we study, which knowingly or unknowingly spread the narrative of Dharma and Niti out there, and we have understood Dharma and Niti from their perspectives. Let us try to understand slightly different from, or not entirely different, but to an extent to rethink about Dharma and Niti or Shastras using some indigenous methods. The first method which I would use would be the Purusharta theory, right? So when we see the modern understanding about human life or personhood as a matter of rights and responsibilities, we have two sets of rights and responsibilities, civil and political rights, and the other one is socio-economic rights, and we tend to distinguish between these two things in a very dramatic way. I don't want to spend my time on this distinction, but we fail to understand what are the inherent human aspirations. We look at we start entire philosophy of law and political science with entitlement. Now, entitlement is something which happens after an action, right? Or it happens to you, it's not in your control. But aspirations is that what leads you. It's what that motivates you, it's what motivates you to act. So, entire philosophy of Indian life was based on Purushartas. And therefore, when we study Dharmashastra and Nitishastra, we should context it in Purusharta studies. Now, Purusharta theory has got a very strong Sankhya basis. This has been attested by both Bhagavad Gita and Shanti Parva. Purusharta is under Sankhya. You must be very much happy to know, if you are a follower of modern legal system, that under Sankhya Purushartas are a guaranteed result, which means socio-economic, material and cultural and spiritual welfare was guaranteed to every individual in the understanding of ancient life of our Rajyas. So there was an interesting statement by Swami Kartartara ji that in Rama Rajya there was not a single person who was denied of any of the four Purushartas. So there's a story that the mother is telling to the child, you better suck my nectar now, okay? Feed my breast now, because you don't have one more life, because your moksha is entitled in Rama Rajya. So the entire idea that socio-economic and spiritual welfare being guaranteed to the people, right? That makes the entire the view in a different way. How does it happen? We would see further in coming up. Now, what we have to understand when we look about Dharma and Niti from the Purushartas, Dharma is identified as one of the Purushartas, whereas Niti is not the part of four Purushartas. Now, what is Dharma in Purushartas? In Purushartas, Dharma is something which you need to be acquired, which you will be acquiring by yourself by following certain prescriptions or certain actions, doing certain actions which has been righteous actions. Now, that's a connotation of what we call as punyam, right? Punyam is something which we get through following Dharmashastra. So, how our Rishishwaras arranged our life is based on these four Purushartas and the fifth additional Shastra or Niti Shastra. That's how they structured the social life of human sense. So now here I'm using another framework from traditional knowledge system, that is Anubandha Chatushtaya, where I'm discussing all the four Shastras, that is Dharma Shastra, Artha Shastra, Kama Shastra, Moksha Shastra, in an Anubandha Chatushtaya framework. What are these four? I again want to not explain concepts of these four, because you are all, I think most of you in the list of participants are very much acquainted with what the Purushartas are. Dharma, as I said, speaks more about punya, whereas Artha speaks about material welfare. Kama speaks about pleasure in terms of both sexual life and not also beyond sexual life. From if you look at the Vishaya in the Kama Shastra, which is Kama Angibhuda Vastu Parijnanam. Ashesha Vastu Parijnanam. So, if a Vastu is becoming a part of your pleasure, or a Vastu is giving you a pleasure, not only Vastus, it can be relations as well. So, Kama Angibhuda Ashesha Vastu Parijnanam is that the subject dealt by Kama Sutra. So, it tells you about how to get pleasure. Now, Moksha Shastra speaks about how you get liberated out of this life and death birth cycle. Now, here is what, if you see the first box at the top, you would see there is a distinction between, I have put some text here, Kanada Sutras, which is Vaisheshika Sutra, Mimamsa as another one, and Manusmriti, Kautilya Artha Shastra belonging to this particular Shastra. So, Kama Sutra of Vatsyayana, again, part of Kama Shastra. Dharmashastra, Upanishads, and many other texts belonging to the Moksha Shastra. I've put Shukra Niti and Kamandaki Niti Sayara there, but those texts are very, very later texts which we have found. Probably there would be a Niti Sayara written by Shukracharya in a very old, not written or propounded by Shukracharya in a very, in the days of Or, which is not left with us these days. So you have to understand that difference of the Shastra and text. Then we look at the prayojana of these Shastras. I've avoided Mimamsa because of the paucity of time which we have. Now, from the Kanada Sutras, which is Vaisheshika Shastra text, it tells that the prayojana of learning, understanding Dharma is basically Abhyudaya Nishrayasa. Abhyudaya loosely can be translated as welfare, and Nishrayasa as a spiritual well-being. And Manusmriti, which speaks about studying Dharma, and the prayojana of studying Dharma here is Karma Viveka. This is a very interesting aspect to understand how two different texts, two different traditions are dealing with Dharma in two different ways, and say that the prayojanas differs. And what is the connection between these schools, which has led to me to discuss much things later in this kind of thing. Now, if you see Arthashastra, it speaks about Bhumehe Arjanam, which means how you acquire Bhumi in the sense like acquire capital, and not only acquire it, how do you retain it? Palanam cha. Kama Sutra, Ihaloka and Paraloka Sugam is your prayojana, and Moksha Shastra as Moksha. When you come to Adhikari, this is very interesting column of my slide. If you see the first one, Padartha Vijnanasya Jitnyasu. This is he's the Adhikari of Dharmashastra. He can study Dharmashastra. Vijigishu is a person who is interested for winning, is interested in victory, interested in life success, can learn Arthashastra. All men and Yavana Stri, both of these people have to study Kama Sutra or Kama Shastra. And people who is qualified with Satana Chadushtaya, now it involves basic spiritual qualities. If I go explaining that again, it will remove. It's like how a person is getting ready for moksha practice. So if you have those qualities, then you are introduced to Moksha Shastra. Now what you have to understand here, in all these things, what is spoken about is a kind of a quality. Right? It's not termed by a brand or a title. Whereas when it comes to the Adhikari of Manusmriti, you see here the word Brahmana being used. Now, should Brahmana be referred as a quality here, or should it be considered as a title of a group of people or a name of a group of people, identity of a group of people, should become a very interesting question to you. This question can give you multiple answers to the question like, which we face these days. I'm not getting into the discussion of that question, how this difference makes, how this difference is going to influence your answers. But we could develop our own answers on this. You should understand that many of the Shastras do not really prescribe that a particular title, a particular person born into a particular caste, they are the ones who are supposed to learn the Shastras. Only few texts like Manusmriti come out with this kind of a very rigid and explicit statement that with a word called Brahmana. How do you want to interpret it? We could discuss that further sometimes later. Now, Vishaya, if you look at the Vishaya of Dharmashastra, Vaisheshika Sutra says it is Tattva Bodha. Now, Tattva Bodha is nothing but understanding the nature of the being as it is. Swami Chinmaya ji has got a wonderful definition for Dharma, which goes along with this. He uses the word Dharma is the law of being. It's not the law of action, it's the law of being. Be as you are. Who you are, you be like that. Right? So understand your self-nature, understand your Dharma and be that. That's the kind of information, that's the kind of message coming to you when they say Dharma is nothing but law of being. So Tattva Bodha is like that. If a leaf is an object, and you should understand the characteristic features of that particular object in order to receive any benefit out of it. And now for the leaf also, in order to call itself a leaf, it has to explicitly show those features. Right? Otherwise, it cannot probably call as a leaf in itself. Right? So these understanding of Dharma as a Tattva Bodha is very much important when we understand Dharmashastra. Now you could easily say, how does Tattva Bodha is going to generate Karma Viveka here? Right? So if you are a leaf, then you should probably doing you'll be showing the explicit features of the leaf. If you happen to be a father, you should be doing what a father does to a child. It's very clear and straightforward that how Tattva Bodha generated Karma Viveka. Right? So that is the relationship between Vaisheshika Sutras and Smritis like Manusmriti, where explicitly when, it should be considered as a later part of life, because if you start reading Manusmriti, the first chapter, many people go to Manu and ask, would you please explain different dharmas of different varnas? So the explanation goes on like, different varnas have got different activities or different karmas to do in life because of owing to different qualities. So I will explain these things. So it makes a very clear statement what Dharmashastra is. Now, not any of these things is very interesting that sometimes some people say, when you follow Dharma, you may not properly acquire wealth. Best example is Mahabharata, right? So many adharmic ways of or violations of the rules of war was done in the Kurukshetra war, such that the Pandavas won the war and got their kingdom back. Now, that's a question of doubt between Dharma and Artha. Similarly, there's a question between how much you can follow Kama in order to, without violating Dharma. So there can be a very, very recent question, a very interesting question, which which is at the root of even modern individual rights, which I say as French Romanticism. In French Romanticism, parents are always the villains, right? And the protagonist of the story would be the children who fall in love affairs. Now, pursuing a life of love, how much it should be adhered in a family sense? How should it follow family setup? Or how should it outbreak the family setup? Is a big question. Not only in French Romanticism, you can see that in a lot of scenes in Indian Puranas, like what happened to Sati, what happened to Parvati, what happened to Rukmini, right? There are so many scenes in which you could understand the same notion of how Kama or how, probably when I say there's a Kama element, there may be a question like, are you trying to say Lord and Lordess is in a Kama relationship? I'm sorry if I am making such kind of statements, but on the other way, it provides you a good lot of material to understand how Kama may, conflict with Dharma, Kula Dharma or Jati Dharma or Varna Dharma or something, and then how do you resolve it? Now, conflict doesn't mean that it will violate always. It creates a question, how do you resolve it? Right? That becomes the question. Like if you want to pursue Kama and it appears to be a violation of certain specific dharmas which are already assigned to you. So for example, I would say that if I today prefer a foreign degree and I prefer to settle in Europe or America, following international law or something, sometimes this particular movement could be a question towards, who would take care of my parents back in my home in their old age, right? It's one of my dharma, Kula Dharma, to take care of my parents in my home. Of course, these days parents can also travel with you to America or Europe, wherever you go. I'm not actually speaking in that sense, but I'm saying it creates a question. Like you want to pursue kama or you want to pursue artha, but sometimes certain assigned dharma as a student, as a father, as a citizen, or these things can conflict in your life. These are simple conflicts. These are not really conflicts which you can't really solve. These are all problems which have a lot of solutions, just that we have to think about it a little bit more consciously. So Dharma Sangava is something like that, sort of. That's one type of Dharma Sangada where Dharma conflicts with other goals of Artha, Kama and Moksha or so. And in these circumstances, there is one more Dharma Sangada, which is one Dharma conflicts with another Dharma, which you see in the case of very famous case of, this is the language of lawyers these days, a very famous case of Sita Parityaga, right? Your Padi Dharma conflicts with your Raja Dharma or something like that, what you do in that time, right? So this becomes another Dharma Sangada. In these cases, what helps you is nothing but Nitishastra, okay? Nitishastra means nothing but that helps you to make a decision and helps you to go forward, how to do it. Nayati iti niti. Now, if you look at the text Shukra Niti or Kamandaki Niti Sara, it predominantly speaks about how kings make decisions. Okay, it does not really speaks about how each of us would really make decisions. Now that's because essentially I would attribute it to the difference between the Shastra and the text. You really don't know what other aspects of Shastra has not been already there in these texts. One of the examples which I can give you is 2 slides apart. It's not 2 slides apart. I think it's the next slide itself is this. Now look at the history of these Shastras in India. Okay? So it's said that Brahma has written a Shastra called Danda Niti in Shanti Parva. Shanti Parva says Brahma has prepared or established or propounded a Shastra called Danda Niti with 100,000 adhyayas. Okay? Now Shukra Niti says it's 100 lakhs adhyayas. I've just put as a separate asterisk note over there. You need not worry about it. Both Kama Sutra and Shanti Parva speaks about 100,000 adhyayas. Now from this, it is actually involving all the 4 Purushartas and as well as Niti there. It's not just about, if you read Shanti Parva, you will see what are the subjects involved in the text or in the Shastra propounded by Brahma. Now once the Brahma propounded these Shastras, what happens is that it has been abridged by certain other people. So for example, by Shiva reduces into 1/10. The 100,000 adhyayas becomes 10,000 adhyayas. Now Purandara creates another text. So these yellow words are titles of these texts. So Bahudantagam, that's the Purandara's text, and Bharaspatyam is the text by Brihaspati, or the Shastra by Brihaspati, and 1,000 adhyayas by Kavya. Now, from this, this much information is provided by Shanti Parva, whereas the 3 parts which you see in the 3 box, like Manu, Brihaspati and Nandishwara, is discussed in Kama Sutra of Vatsyayana. So Kama Sutra of Vatsyayana says, from when Brahma propounded this particular larger treatise or larger Shastra, from there 3 different Shastras were prepared. Manu prepared Dharmashastra, Brihaspati prepared Arthashastra, and Nandishwara prepared Kama Shastra. So from Nandishwara's Kama Sutra, you see Uddalaga again abridging it. Okay. Now if you read Mahabharata, you will see a case where Uddalaga, who is the son of Shetaketu, yes, I think it's the same. So the son of Shetaketu, who establishes, marital relationship, the sanctity of marital relationship in our world. So there was a discussion when Panjali marries 5, how one lady can go to multiple men, like that. There was some discussion. In that discussion, very clearly Mahabharata says that was the kind of behavior. Polygamy and polyandry both were there in the ancient life, but Uddalaga, as a son I'm sorry if I'm mistaking the son and the father, whoever it is, when he saw his mother is going with another man, Parapurusha, he felt completely affected, and he established the theory of padivritya or being or restricting the marital life or eschewing sanctity of marital life. So which actually collides with this particular argument seen in Kama Sutra, that because Kama Shastra is abridged by Uddalaga. So if he's abridged by Uddalaga, then that Uddalaga speaking about relationship between wife and man falls literally into a tradition. So my argument here is that in Shukraniti or Kamandakya Niti Sara would not or don't have the actual capacity, actual understanding about what Brahma had told or what the others have told, because it has always been reduced and many of these texts are not with us these days. So when the argument comes there, we should not feel, okay, Nitishastra only speaks about what Raja has to do, so it cannot probably help us in present life because we are not kings anymore. We need not really actually think like that. You can probably look at what the text says and understand further values from Nitishastra text. So now, when I said this about Shastra's chronology, I'm giving you another chronology which is established by P.V. Kane. Now, I will not call it as chronology of Shastra here. I would probably call it as history of sources. So he speaks about Veda Samhitas, Nirukta, Grihya Sutras, Srauta Sutras, Purva Mimamsa, Artha Shastra, Manusmriti. Now, these are about the text sources which he has got, or if he have seen a text, whether that text in his hand, when was it composed? Okay, he is arriving at a understanding. Okay, that particular text could have been composed in this particular time period. So based on this, he has arrived at this particular structure of history of sources, which you could very well see in the first page of his first volume of History of Dharmashastra. So even if this is shorter, I've just put it as a glimpse because I just want to differentiate between how tradition of Shastra has evolved down and how sources have been historically assigned dates by scholars of last 2 centuries. Now, but this P.V. Kane's sources actually gives me a very interesting statement, just a temerity statement. I will not conclude so, but it is a statement which it seems to be very, I feel excited to speak like that. I would say Bhagavad Gita is the first Nitishastra text going by P.V. Kane's history of sources. Okay, because Arjuna is in a Dharma Sangada. Okay, Arjuna is in a Sangada where Dharma is conflicting with his Artha. Not only that, his Dharma is conflicting with his own Kula Dharma, Varna Dharma and all. So there are 2 types of Dharma Sangada. One is Dharma conflicting with other Purushartas. The other is Dharma conflicting with Dharma in itself. Now, when Arjuna is in this particular state, okay, someone is advising Arjuna what to do, what decisions to make. Now, that should definitely be considered as a Niti Shastra according to the definition of Niti, Niti. Whether, I know that our most Pujya Adi Shankaracharya has propounded or has brought Bhagavad Gita into the spiritual tradition, completely accepting it, completely humble before it, but just to make a statement or just to understand a little bit further, because when Arjuna has been advised by Krishna, it's not just limited to kings. It's very clear. Whatever he speaks is not just limited to kings or not limited to Kshatriya. Whereas other Niti Shastra texts, which, as I said, whether it is Shukraniti or something, it is more about statecraft. So relying on Bhagavad Gita would be really a more meaningful than sometimes relying on many other texts. Also, not only because of that reason, but one more reason, because both Bhagavad Gita and Purushartas has got immense connections to Sankhya Darshana. Right? So Sankhya Yoga is, that's what we say about Bhagavad Gita. So Sankhya Darshana is the foundational philosophy which sets platform for Purusharta studies as well as, Niti Shastra as such. So in that case, again, referring to Bhagavad Gita as a Niti text will be definitely meaningful and consistent with so many ideas out there. So looking at this, I have prepared some particular chart. Probably it is little bit also again extravagant or overwhelming from my side. If you feel so, please be great. Please use your wisdom to pardon me or forgive me in that sense. But this map or this particular conceptual model, I have shared it with my professor, and he seems to be quite okay with it. The argument here which I am trying to make is that Niti Shastra, if I am going back to the earlier slide, if you see the Vishaya of Niti, okay, it's Vinaya. I'll come to what Vinaya is very soon. Now, Vinaya is Syad Sarva Sammatam. Now, the Adhikari means all of us has capacity to learn Niti Shastra. Not a single person, or it is not assigned to, even Shukaniti says it's Syad Sarva Sammatam. So it's not just addressed to Raja, though it's propounded like that. It is I think in one of the slokas, 92 or 93, Raja is advised to learn Vinaya first, or acquire Vinaya first. Then it has to be imparted to Amatyas. Then it has to be imparted to the family of Raja, and then it has to be imparted to the Praja. So it is a Shastra which is learned by all, or all are expected to learn. And you can see the kind of prayojana, sarvobhajivagam, sarvabhishtagaram, right? Dharma, artha, kama, moolam, and moksha pradamyataha. So many people, I have seen many of my fellow colleagues who used to say, okay, Dharma, Arthashastra, Nitishastra are not something for me because I'm more into spiritual studies, Vedantic studies. These Shastras need not actually help me in terms of understanding what moksha is or acquiring moksha is. Of course, it is not a specified, specialized study of what moksha is or how Jiva Brahma subject has been dealt with. But the prayojana of understanding Niti Shastra is very well, has included acquisition of the fourth Purusharta as well. So, going back to the, going forward to the other slide, what I wanted to say is that all knowledge which helps us to take decision in life belongs to the understanding of Niti. So it takes in all, in modern day also, when in legal education we tell that though you learn legislations, you are supposed to understand the facts of your cases or the facts of the social life thoroughly. So, many people, these days, many people come and go for I think very recently, even after the second strain of virus has been come out in England, there has been a protest against the mandatory rule of having a mask. Now, probably it is because of your fundamental liberty. Individual liberty is that great human right which you have to support at any cost. But the fact of the science, you can't negate it, right? So you should understand that there is a fact, and of course that fact cannot just generate laws. Of course that fact has to be quoted with values, but study of facts will give you at least initial understanding of Viveka on how to act. So that's what I was also saying, the connection between Vaisheshika and Dharmashastra. Vaisheshika speaks about each and everything, both Purusha and Prakriti. Sankhya also speaks about Prakriti and Purusha, the known Prakriti, Vyakta, and the unknown Prakriti, Avyakta, and also about the person who is experiencing the Prakriti as Purusha. Now, when he speaks about all these objects and what is the true nature of these objects, it actually allows you to take a decision, right? It gives you that viveka, wisdom to what to do next. Whether the law says you so or not, whether Dharmashastra says you or not, whether some rishi or some legislator had propounded or asked you to do or not, you yourself will understand what is the right thing to do, right? So Niti Shastra belongs to that order, and I would say all Shastras, like all the four Purushartas, actually follow a part in Niti Shastra. Niti Shastra, not Niti text, okay? Niti Shastra should be understood by understanding all these four Shastras, and all these four Shastras should be interpreted on the basis of Nyaya Vaisheshika, also on the basis of Vyakarana Mimamsa. You know the difference between how these different Shastras, like Nyaya as a logical reasoning, and Vaisheshika, as I just now said, about Prameya Vijara, and Vyakarana as a grammatical tool, and Mimamsa as more complex ideas of interpretation of Shastric text, how it helps to understand text written under these Shastras. So when I say study Dharmashastra, you can't just read Manuspati and say you learned Dharmashastra. It becomes only one text of Dharmashastra, right? Similarly, Arthashastra, Kautilyan Arthashastra is one text. Brihaspati is the one who has originally propounded Arthashastra. Now, how far he has travelled down? If you look at Arthashastra, Arthashastra says Namas Shukracharya, Brihaspati, Manu, Bhargava. There are so many, I think 8 or 7 scholars who are giving information to Kautilya, right? So, their understanding about Artha and its principles has also to be studied using these instruments, and then you have to arrive at a text of kind of thing. Here actually I want to make one single interesting statement also. There is a knowledge that is not known to you, and there is a knowledge which is known to you. Whenever you have arrived at knowledge which is known to humanity, we will try to classify it into different Shastras, different disciplines, and arrive at these kind of models. But Vedas very clearly says Ananda hi Vedas, right? Which means we know a lot of part of Vedas, and we really don't know much about others. So what it actually tells you is, I feel, when I hear the word Asthika, okay, Asti di manye Asthika, that's what we say in tradition. So people ask, Kim asti di manye? Like, what do you feel that there exists? Okay. If you feel that there exists a knowledge which is not known to you, which is not taught to you, okay, then who are you? You will definitely be a humble person to listen to someone else, to learn from someone else, because you already know that there is a knowledge which you don't have, right? So the feeling that there is a knowledge which you don't know, there exists a knowledge which you really don't know, is that what makes you Vinaya. Now you know the Vishaya of Nitishastra is nothing but Vinaya, right? So the connection is that if you are an Astika, you agrees to the principle that there exists a knowledge which you really don't know or which is not taught to you, which means you automatically, habitually, naturally become a Vinayanvita, right? From a Vinayanvita, you become what you call as Agraganya in Nitishastra. If you read this sloka from Shukraniti, it very clearly says, Nayasya Vinayo Moolam, Vinayaha Shastra Nishchayat, which means known Shastra is this much, you know about it Nishchayena, right? Vinayasya Indriya Jayasthat Yuktaha Shastram Richadi. So now if a person who is Vinayanvita, then he will have Indriya Jaya. That is what which says that we overcome the aspirations which is promoted by our sensory organs, and that if you overcome that, you would definitely think about more and more knowledge. And the word Shastram Richadi is very interesting. You can either understand it as Shastram goes to him, the person who is Vinaya, which means more and more knowledge which is not known to him would be going to him further and further and further. Right? He'll be getting further and further knowledge. Or you can also understand that he will be learning, he will be acquiring more knowledge within the sphere of whatever you have learned. But in which way? It clearly shows how Vinaya is the pool which actually sets the life in Bharat. Now, actually, if we go further, because time is going down, I actually want to say one more thing. It's that, as I said, how there are Niti will help you, and Niti asks you to be Vinayanvita, but at the same time, Niti asks you to do certain other things. Okay, so the clear, if you are seeing my slides over there, you would see certain issues like this. Okay, in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna relates himself as Dharma Sammuda Cheta, which means he is confused of Dharma. And now when he is confused of Dharma, what is Krishna telling to him? Okay? His Krishna is telling, Uttishta Parantapa, which means get up, act, forget about your confusion, act. Now how can that happen? What is this? Forget about your confusion, disregard your confusion and act. How are you supposed to act? There is nothing else which you can do, is that Sudharmam. Now, in any circumstances, don't forget your Sudharma. It should not be na vigimpadum arhasi, right? So you cannot actually leave your Sudharma at any cost. Now, if you look at Shukraniti, it says, Vinasa dharma na sukham. So your happiness is associated with Swadharma, and at any cost you cannot give away Swadharma. Now that's a very interesting connotation. Here is what I actually want to say what Dharma is. Okay? If you have heard that that Varna Dharma or Varna, Krishna says Guna Karma Vibhakascha, right? Now which means quality and karma is setting up a dharma for a varna. Now the same rule applies to an individual. See, if I fight, Yudhishthira fought and went and, sorry, not Yudhishthira, Duryodhana fought, got afraid, hid in a river, right? Nobody is actually going to feel like, he's going to do an apakirti to him, because he is anyhow bound to fail. He's not that hero like Arjuna. And his qualities probably can match with that karma which he did. Okay, there is no apakirti over there. Whereas Arjuna, if he has left the war field, the apakirti which would have generated in that particular instance is so huge that you cannot probably escape from that particular baggage any point of time. So I think there is another shloka where Krishna very clearly says, it will not going to help your dharma, it will also not going to help your kirti. Right? Both will be lost. Why do you want to do this? Now, if you earlier refer back what was his problem, Arjuna's problem is in these three shlokas. Okay? He says, if he fights with his own family, there would be a kulakshayam. Right? Now, that kulakshayam will lead you to varna sangara. That comes in the next. And what varna sangara will lead you to jadikshayam or confusion in jadi dharma. Udasyande jadi dharma. So, first what is being lost is kula dharma. Now, when kula dharma is lost, varna sangara happens, not jadi dharma happens. Okay? Once the kula is lost, what is lost is essentially varna dharma. And when varna dharma is lost, jati dharma is coming next. Now, if you look at this sequence, you would be able to conceive what kind of society we were in what was the composition of the society, how that society has been arranged in our life, which I can very easily move to this and tell you how. Forget about the definition. Kulam becomes the first concern. If you take Arthashastra, the third chapter, Kautilya says, Vivaha Purvo Vyavahara, or Vyavahara Purvo Vivaha. So his argument is, the first human transaction or it's marriage. Now, Brihaspati, Narada, Bhargava all have difference of opinion. How Kautilya sets this particular debate is that only a Grihasthrami is supposed to have entered into Vyavahara. A brahmachari cannot enter into a Vyavahara. That's what his argument. I don't know whether it's correct or not. But it gives you an immense insight that marriage is the first interaction or the first human interaction or Vyavahara which establishes a family. Now, once you establish a family, someone gets birth in that family, So, Jatya, what happens becomes the Jati. So the kulam is actually probably, we should start from understanding kulam than from janma, jati, right? Because it's also associated with Bhagavad Gita's interpretation, Arjuna's view also. Now why jati comes next is like, once somebody is birth, if you look at the ancient society, very clearly they believed there are two types of qualities. One is inherited and the other is acquired. And the most easiest way of conducting your life is to align training into the qualities which you already have by birth. It's a very simple logic, okay? And that is the reason why people attach to Jati Dharma. It need not be a very stringent, rigid rule as we see these days in many of the Shastric texts or Smriti Granthas. That would have been written very later. But the way, the times when Arjuna or Krishna propounding Varnashramas or Varnashrama Dharmas, that would not have been the case essentially. Right? If you see Manusmriti, when Jati Dharma is explained, when he speaks about Shudra's karma, Shudra's duties, he uses the word anasaya. Without jealousy, Shudra has to do. Now that word is not appearing in the karma of Brahmana or in the karma of Vaishya or Kshatriya. Now you look at the Chaturvarna Ashrama explanations given in Bhagavad Gita, when Shudra's work is discussed, Anasuya is not there. So it's very clearly, it explains that when Krishna saw about Varna Vivechana or Varna Viveka, there is not even an element of somebody being deprived such that he thinks about other groups in a jealousy way. Right? So that is very essentially to be understood that Jati Dharma has been followed because training can easily match with your inherited qualities. If there is a way that you understand what your inherited qualities are earlier itself, then the training matches. That's where, when I said the earlier Paranjoli from my family, that makes an interesting statement. I'm not saying that's the truth. Okay, someone like Karna or someone like many other heroes and protagonists of Indian Puranas and Itihasas has overcome this. They have overcome the Jati Dharma, acquired more and more other gunas, which allowed them to work much better and better, and they did their following of Varna. I have put Vamsha in between because Mahabharata and Ramayana is giving a lot of importance to Vamsha. There is no time to discuss the importance of Vamsha at the moment, so I'm skipping that. Also Ashrama, I'm skipping that. Just to understand that what it could mean, Kulam, Jati and Varna. It is very clear that these assignments of roles by Kulam or Jati or Varnam can probably conflict with your choice or can create confusion in your choice what to be followed. And the only way you can come out of this is to listen to yourself, understand the nature of yourself. What is the true nature, Vaisheshika, right? If you understand your nature, then follow that qualities which will allow you to be, feel samatvam and feel yogatvam, that kind of equanimity you will feel. So you just do that. That is the statement here. So, Swadharmam karotu, or if Krishna advises Arjuna to follow Swadharma, the immediate word next comes is Kshatriya. So everybody says, finally Krishna also said, you follow Varna Dharma. No, that's not what he means there. Essentially he means, you have shown the qualities, you have the highest qualities of Kshatriya in this world. If you run away from this field, the apakirti you are going to suffer will be too much. Now, what is the performance, what is the significance of the word apakirti here? Right? That also has to be conflated with Sita Parityaga. The definition, the reason why Rama says that he is going to give away Sita is also the word apakirti. Now, apakirti is a very interesting statement. I think my time is up. I can probably some other day would probably discuss about apakirti and how it is going to, why apakirti is very important in Indian social life, in the way we have arranged our lives. It is nothing but only for the Shastric reason, there is a difference or the distinction between three concepts, which is called as Sat, Satya and Dharma. Sat is the object as such, in existence. Satya is about, is something which we all share in our, using our shabda. You speak, you interact with each other about. So for example, if I say if you're seeing this particular glass, if I say this is glass, that's truth, but it's a partial truth, right? It is something more than glass. It can be, there will be more features to this, right? So somebody can use it for drinking water, someone can use it for drinking juice, someone can use it for light experiments. So many things can happen with this particular glass. So Satya is something which exists only in interpersonal realm, not in individualistic realm, where what is existing in reality is Sat. But when we discourse, when we engage in discussion with Sat, it converts into Satya. Now, that Satya is also not fully conversant with the Dharma. Many qualities of this glass is not involved in the conversational statement which I make, this is a glass, right? I say this is a glass. Now, for what purpose this glass should be used, right? You can say, someone will say you use this for drinking water. Someone else will come, this is a whiskey glass. Or someone will come and say, this is a juice, you should put orange juice in it, it looks nice like that. Someone say, oh look, this is something, it's not really a glass, it's something made of fire, something like that, I don't know. So there is a difference between Satya and Dharma. So these conflicts are very interestingly explained in Puranas. If you take Vanaparva, there is an interesting discussion between Bhima and Yudhishthira about whether the Sandhi they have put with Duryodhana has to be followed or not. Vanavasa, Bhima says it's all fraud, it's all due to coercion of Dhritarashtra and fraud of Shagini, you have arrived at this treaty. Now, should we follow this? We should be not following it. We have support of Krishna's entire Sainya and also Drishtadumna's Sainya. We can easily win over Duryodhana. We should not follow this treaty, we should fight. Then Yudhishthira speaks about, even if it is made out of fraud, even if it is made out of adharma, I have to do the paripalanam of the satyam which I have kept. Even at the loss of my nation, even at the loss of my rajyam, I will do satya paripalanam. Now, why is it that satya paripalanam important? Because that is the only way by which you and another person can arrive at a consensus. If you and I can't talk, if you and I cannot engage in communication, we will never arrive at a consensus way of doing things in future. So the community, a society in India, in ancient Indian philosophy of Dharmashastra or Nitishastra, a community is defined by a common destination. Whereas if you take the modern definition of community or people in international law or international relations, we will say community is of a common heritage, a common past. Right now, if you and I differ about my past, how can we be a community, right? So the moment if we want to have a life together, going forward together, then we should look at the society from a common future perspective, right? Not from a past or heritage perspective. This is the reason by which Satya, Apakirti, the primacy of Shabda is because of this particular reason. The content, the civic trust which supports governability, the ability of the government to govern people and the ability of the people to be amending, to be themselves being amending to the governance structure out there. This too is positively correlated. There are a lot of studies in 2012, 10, 8 with regard to civic trust and governability. So when Rama says, Abhagirti bhayam moolam, if I am giving away with Sita, it's a kind of understanding about statecraft. Now, whether it is correct or not, or whether it is right or wrong, there are so many other aspects to it. The reasons propounded or the reasons seen in the text as the dialogue given by Rama is Apakirti. And this Apakirti issue is very much discussed in Nitishastra of Shukracharya, how Apakirti is going to create problems in a state, and how civic trust is going to be. And you can conflict this with the idea of Arthashastra, where Kautilya says, amongst all the Durgas, Durga means forts which protects a country, Nara Durga is the most powerful Durga. Nara Durga means the fort which is created out of citizens. So if citizens create a fort, if they protect the king, then that is the best, most powerful fort which defends the kingdom and the king. So this is to be understood in that sense. Now, this is not, whatever I have said so far has given you probably some different or some alternative view of looking at society or looking at Varna, Jati and all. It also has one more important concept which I have to discuss, but I can't discuss because of the paucity of time. So, but I will just keep that shloka, giving all credits to Manu here. It is from Manu, the Manusmriti. In Kali Yugam, there is only one dharma which is considered as the most supreme dharma. That is nothing but dhanam. Now, if I've so far spoken about communication and solidarity building out of Satya Paripalanam, you can also understand how dhanam is going to create further solidarity. You can relate to the issues of Shipi Chakravarti, issues of Bali, Mahabali, where you will understand how dhanam, almost every scene in Mahabharata, I would say that most predominant idea in Mahabharata's all 18 parvas is that one or the other way, someone is eulogizing the idea of dana. You should see it, you should enjoy the concept of giving dana here, and we will speak, if some other session is allotted to me, about how dana is going to change the worldview which we are living these days. Yes, so if in Sankhya Karika also there are Ashta Siddhis mentioned, there you will see Dhanam is creating to Suhut Prapti allowing you to learn Adhyayanam, Vinayam, and learning means through Shabda, and Shabda is allowing you to do Uha, Swadhyaya of what your Swadharma is. I think I'll stop here for the present session because I've already taken 5 more minutes than 7. So I would really cherish if I could actually speak about Ashtagunas, which we can find in Dharmakshetras, and how it will change the worldview of the ancient society. Perhaps some other day, if you all and Gauriji feel that my talk was useful to you, and if, as I said, the first slide, if something has come out well, all to my Guru's feet.
Thank you, Nithin, for a very wonderful presentation. And as you said, Dharmashastra and Nitishastra, there were 2 texts, two Shastras, and in a 15-minute session, you couldn't do justice to that. Well understood. There are 2 questions. Let us quickly deal with those questions. If you can refer to that slide where, you have mentioned that first ever model you have presented about the Veda, the knowledge which is unknown, and then the Niti Shastra, there are Dharma Shastra, Kama Shastra, etc. And why Moksha Shastra is in different color? Yeah, that was the question by Babu SK.
That's because as Purusharta theory identifies the first 3 as Trivargas and the 4th one as Apavarga. So even Kama Sutra is the one Shastric text which speaks about all the 4 together in its first and second chapter. I think only, about all the 4, where Kama Sutra also only speaks about the conflict between Dharma, Artha, Kama, not with the Moksha. Now, many of the people have actually, most of these days, many scholars, both traditional and non-traditional scholars says, you cannot refer to Moksha Shastras or Brahma Sutra Mahabhashya or Shankaracharya's Advaita Siddhanta and all to resolve the transactional problems in human life, which I challenge with 2 incidents. One is, in Brahma Sutra, I think Brihadopanishad commentary, Shankaracharya himself says how people, when initially were all knowledgeable about Brahma and how they behaved, and how later avidya made them behaving in a different sense, in a different way. That is one argument. Second is from Mahabharata, where Hanuman and Bhima meets. What happens is that Hanuman says that I am too old, you can cross over me and go to the place where you want to go. Like Bhima was in search for Saugandhika Pushpam. But Bhima says, Nirguna Parabrahma is residing in you. How can I cross over your body, cross over your tail, which is a disrespect to the Nirguna Parabrahma which is occupied by you? So I see an application of Advaita Vedanta, not only Advaita Vedanta, the application of moksha philosophy in making a lot of choices in our lives as well. Whether it is as to dignity, as to equality, or as to liberty, whatever you call in your terms in modern language, I believe Moksha Shastra has a lot to tell us. One more most important thing which Moksha Shastra can tell you is about the importance of abhyasa. One of the interesting debates which we have is how much abhyasa can alter your desires and also allow you to acquire new skills. I believe completely in abhyasa. My professor considers abhyasa as one of the pramanas by which you gain further knowledge.
Rajagopalanji has complimented you for the integrating and compiling these Vedic details. And he has a question, as a Vedic researcher and lawyer, don't you feel that the present day disharmony in our society is mainly because of Varna classification misunderstood?
Probably true. It is because I feel it's very much true that whether we discredit Varnashrama or not, we are one or the other way following the wrong side of Varna Sangra. To me, I used to say Varna Sangra means if you don't understand your qualities and how it matches with your karma. So sometimes I myself look at my life. I'm using my own introspective examples in the discussions because that is more favorable, not hurting anyone. So I feel if it is important that you understand your qualities and understand what work you can do. If you can't really teach and then you take up a teaching position in university or in college, then I think that's the biggest corruption which you do. These days, that's what is happening, and I call this kind of mismatch between quality of a human being and the work he does as a Varna Sankara. So you are 100% correct, Professor, who have asked this question, that we should understand what Varnashrama is.
Thank you, Nithin. And since we have already transgressed the time, I think we should conclude here. I thank all the audience, the participants, for your patient listening. I thank Nithin. And the next topic in OLA IKS will be on 21st of January, and that will be given by Nilesh Oak. Many of you must be following him. The topic is Ancient Indian Astronomy, Key to Ancient Indian Happiness or Prosperity. So, looking forward to your participation, both in OLA Kala Samvada as well as OLA IKS. Let me conclude with Shanti Mantra. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Hari Om. Shubharatri.